The drug cartels are infamous for targeting recruits at scandalously young ages. One boy who started moving dope at age 15 grew up to become one of Mexico's most notorious drug lords, El Chapo.
So in my jail next door here, we went from 1 or 2 remanded juveniles to 36. That's an epidemic. It can show you what the cartel was doing to exploit these kids.
In 2015, officials in Cochise County, a hot spot for smuggling, decided to try something new to stop it. What is a secret hold?
Well, a secret hold is when you put a hold on, you don't want anybody to know about it. Maybe they do it for a reason that's not a very good reason, so it's secret.
What's got the long-standing Republican senator from Iowa so fired up?
The public's business ought to be public.
Senator Chuck Grassley unloads on your right to know.
This year, the Department of Defense issued a report saying the effects of a changing climate are a national security issue, impacting missions and bases.
Should the military bases be being moved to higher ground?
Yes.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. We begin with an important border issue you probably don't know much about. Under long-standing federal policy, when underage kids are caught smuggling drugs from Mexico into the U.S., they're usually let go with no consequences. Not surprisingly, that's prompted Mexico's drug cartels to increasingly rely on children to move their illegal products. Sometimes the children are brutalized. Today's cover story is how one border county has gotten creative to interrupt the destructive dynamic. A note, some of the images are graphic. You've seen the pictures of smugglers, so-called human mules, transporting illegal drugs across the border from Mexico into the U.S. What you may not realize is how many of them are high school-aged teens. The smuggler here was 17 when he was caught. These 2 young drug smugglers, also 17. One of the smugglers seen here carrying a giant bale of marijuana, age 16.
The Border Patrol members of the local stations approached me with a particular problem they had, which was with juveniles being used by the cartel to smuggle large quantities of drugs into the United States.
What kind of drugs?
Most often it was marijuana. But when I say large quantities, we're talking about loads in a group of 240 to 320 pounds.
Brian McIntyre is the lead prosecutor in Cochise County, Arizona, which borders Mexico. And they're using the same juveniles over and over again? You would see them?
And the problem that Border Patrol had is that they were getting 3- and 4-time offenders who were never having any consequences imposed upon them. As a result, they're becoming basically professional drug mules, becoming very familiar with the routes in Cochise County, very familiar with the operation of Border Patrol, and what routes to exploit, and just getting better and better.
Why were there no consequences for juveniles who were moving drugs across the border?
So at the time, the federal government, and still to this day, didn't have a good mechanism to deal with individuals who were between the ages of 14 and 18 who were committing criminal offenses. And so essentially it was, you might catch them on day 1, but they had to be immediately returned, and then you can catch them on day 2 again.
The drug cartels are infamous for targeting recruits at scandalously young ages. One boy who started moving dope at age 15 grew up to become one of Mexico's most notorious drug lords, El Chapo. He's now serving a life sentence in U.S. prison. It's estimated cartels have recruited tens of thousands of children as young as age 12. Captured juveniles told police they were paid up to $500 per double-bundled backpack of marijuana.
You can see the concertina wire that the military put in.
In 2015, officials in Cochise County, a hot spot for smuggling, decided to try something new to stop it.
So after a series of meetings, we worked with the Cochise County Sheriff's Department and Border Patrol, Douglas Police Department, Bisbee Police Department, and came up with a plan. And Unlike other operations that get conducted that require congressional approval and a whole lot of paper, we did it on a handshake. And what we agreed was that local law enforcement would go down and take the case from Border Patrol anytime a juvenile was involved. So what that might mean is we have a group of 5 individuals and there's 1 juvenile. Now we're going to take all 5 individuals, all 5 packs, and process all of them through our state system, through our county.
The handshake launched Operation Immediate Consequences. Anytime Border Patrol picked up a juvenile in Cochise County, the sheriff's office agreed to take over the whole case and prosecute, including any adults in the group. Right away, teen drug smugglers started filling space in Cochise County's small jail. Sheriff Mark Daniels.
So in my jail next door here, we went from 1 or 2 remanded juveniles to 36 was the average daily population for juveniles that were remanded for drugs. That's an epidemic. In a rural county, it's an epidemic. And it showed you what the cartel was doing to exploit these kids.
In the first 6 months, we had 36 juveniles apprehended. That's a huge number for a small county, or a county of maybe 130,000 people.
And you prosecuted all of them?
And we prosecuted all of them.
In addition to strict enforcement, the county started Operation Detour in border schools where smugglers recruit kids. The mission is to send the message that, in this county at least, juveniles will be prosecuted. As part of the program, students are shown gruesome images of what can happen to them if they get mixed up with cartels.
This 15-year-old male who reported to the port of entry in Douglas, and he was asking for asylum, but really he was just asking for protection. And what had happened with him was he got scared, he got spooked while attempting to mule a load, dropped the pack, and crossed back into Mexico. The cartel individuals responsible for that load got to him, and they beat his entire backside off with a 2x4. That was his consequence for failing to deliver. And that's why he was asking for protection. There's a video which was posted by the cartel to show people what happens to you if you don't do the cartel's bidding.
Cochise County officials had no idea what the impact would be after that first 6 months when they arrested 36 juveniles. What has happened to the juveniles you've seen come into this county moving drugs since word's gotten out about your prosecution?
Our initial 6-month figure looked pretty much the same the second 6 months. Then it began a decline, and then looking into about 2 years into the program, we were down to 20. 3 years into the program, we were down to 10.
We're standing united with our federal partners.
As for 2019, they say they've arrested just 2 juveniles for smuggling. They credit the significant drop to the fact that their new reputation has spread among the bad guys south of the border.
If you smuggle drugs in my county, there's a 100% chance that when we get you, you're going to prison.
You have a 100% conviction rate.
We have a 100% conviction rate, and the cartels know that. They know that.
It's not been an easy road. Operation Immediate Consequences has drawn plenty of attention and criticism along the way.
My own court system told me that they didn't want to take these cases in my county. And I'll say to you what I said to them. I didn't know you had a choice. You're a trier of facts. I didn't know you had a choice. And that backed off on that. Now people are saying, and this is where the pressure came, Sheriff, this is cruel. These are kids. No, these were vulnerable kids that were exploited by a cartel that don't care about these kids. They're safer in my hands, where they get education, they get counseling, they get health, they get good meals, and hopefully they get some structure in their life when they get out in a year and a half, that they see life different. That's our goal.
It's too soon to know for sure, they say, but in a drug war that's been marred by too many losses, one county hopes they've scored a rare win. Operation Immediate Consequences has seen only 2 juvenile repeat offenders in the last 4 years. Coming up on Full Measure, secrecy on Capitol Hill. Senator Chuck Grassley exposes a little-known practice called secret holds. In the odd inner workings of Congress, there's something called a legislative hold. It gives any individual senator the power to stop a nominee or a bill, put a hold on them. The idea is to encourage negotiations between those for and against. But sometimes the senator making the hold keeps his name secret. Senator Chuck Grassley tells why he's been trying for a decade to stop the secrecy.
Why do you put a hold on? A lot of times people put a hold on because they want to negotiate something or they want to use it as a lever to get something else. So I use holds, but I've always put a statement in the record of why I'm putting a hold on an individual nominee or a bill, so people know who it is. Come and talk to Chuck Grassley and I'll tell you what the problems is I've got. And you can negotiate then whatever you want to negotiate.
What is a secret hold?
Well, a secret hold is when you put a hold on, you don't want anybody to know about it. So don't you think the public's business ought to be public? Well, if it's going to be secret, how's anybody know that why you're holding it? Maybe they do it for a reason that's not a very good reason, so it's secret.
Some important secret holds have gotten a lot of attention over the years. One senator's secret hold killed a new whistleblower bill to protect federal employees reporting corruption. And an unnamed senator temporarily blocked a cost of living increase for disabled vets and their survivors. With the names of the holding senators kept anonymous, it's impossible for other senators to know their reasoning or negotiate a compromise.
Senator Wyden and I have been at this for a long, long time.
So in 2011, Senators Grassley and Ron Wyden successfully led a bipartisan effort to ban secret holds starting in 2013. A new rule said all senators must disclose their names and reasoning in the congressional record within 2 days of making a hold.
The fact is, this resolution deals with a sweeping, almost unparalleled legislative power. If you want to exercise that extraordinary power, you ought to do it in sunlight.
But Grassley says after all this time, senators today are routinely ignoring the ban on secret holds.
8 years later, it happens every day that people put a hold on a bill or a nominee and don't put their statement in the public record. We need these rules enforced, and the leadership of the Republican Democratic Party ought to be enforcing these rules.
Grassley has gone so far as to chide the secret holders on the Senate floor.
The rules of this Senate require all members that put a hold on a nomination or a bill within 2 days after doing that to put something in the record. And most senators aren't following that rule of the Senate. So if you got some disagreement about something and you put a secret hold on and somebody ought to sit down and wants to talk to you and see what's wrong, how are they going to know who it is?
Senators Grassley and Wyden have now issued a letter to colleagues reminding them they're required to identify themselves if they hold up a nomination or a bill. Why does that matter to the American public?
It ought to matter to the American public because, number one, the public's business ought to be public. And when you're trying to pass legislation and it's not getting passed and somebody's holding it up and you don't even know who's holding it up, then really the public's business isn't public. Just people to sit down and talk to each other is a very necessary process of getting the United States functioning as the legislative and deliberative body it has a reputation for being.
By the way, only 4 senators, all Republicans, voted originally to keep secret holds back in 2011. Coming up on Full Measure, could rising seas threaten our military bases? Why some military leaders are taking action. Some experts claim rising sea levels may pose a risk to our national security, with strategic military bases facing chronic flooding and loss of land. Critics say the threat's not real. Lisa Fletcher reports.
This flooded runway at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska is the aftermath of a spring rain event that submerged the base. It's evidence, some climate experts say, key military bases may be at risk from a different type of enemy: higher seas and stronger storms.
There are reports that sea level rise is going to impact our military's ability to function.
Well, sea level rise affects the military both as to facilities and its strategic mission. Not surprisingly, a whole lot of naval bases are in low places.
LSU law professor Ed Richards is an expert in disaster management. He's studied the threat facing our military. This year, the Department of Defense issued a report saying the effects of a changing climate are a national security issue, impacting missions and bases.
It's all the strategic infrastructure, where the people on shore live, where the ship's stores are kept. Those are all subject to what we term nuisance flooding, but as nuisance flooding becomes every few days you flood, you really can't function.
Hurricane Michael hit Air Force Base Tyndall near Panama City, Florida in 2018, damaging a fleet of F-22 fighter jets worth $1 billion.
And that base was a major strategic base for the Air Force. There was another major base very close by. If the storm had a slightly different track, it would have taken out both of them.
In 2016, a panel of military experts and the Center for Climate and Security broke down the costs of rising seas on our military bases. Among their findings, Naval Air Station Key West. By 2070, high tides could flood up to 95% of the station. Portsmouth's Naval Shipyard in Maine is in charge of the Navy's nuclear-powered submarines. By 2050, it could be flooded between 80 and 190 times every year. California's Camp Pendleton, one of the largest marine bases in America, also faces the threat of rising sea levels that could cost up to $1.6 billion to recover. Still, the roots and reality of climate change remain in question by critics.
There are people who say that climate change and sea level rise is really a liberal contrivance, and it is not something that is real or that needs to be worried about to the degree that a lot of people worry about it. What's your position on it?
The one inescapable sign of climate change is sea level rise. The rate of sea level rise has been increasing over the last 40 years. So sea level rise is the one thing you really can't explain away.
The Government Accountability Office took a look at how military bases are responding to the rising threat. 15 out of 23 were considering extreme weather and climate change in their plans.
How seriously do you think the Department of Defense is taking the issue of sea level rise and climate change?
Previous to this administration, the Department of Defense was a leader in this. They've published reports for 10 or 15 years looking at the risks, both the geopolitical risks and the infrastructure risks. They're still issuing reports that are pretty honest, although there's more and more pressure on them, as with other government agencies, to stop talking about climate change.
Should the military bases be being moved to higher ground?
Yes. The Congress right now, the House, is asking the military to do a projection on the cost of moving bases. And that may be part of the next military appropriations bill, is an estimate of the cost of moving or reconfiguring bases to deal with climate change risk.
The National Defense Authorization Act for 2020, the military budget, would require military installations to assess risks from sea level rise and extreme weather and take action to protect them if need be. Ahead on Full Measure, your tax dollars spent on removing tree snakes. We look at Congress's controversial practice of earmarking as we follow the money next. In this week's Follow the Money, the controversial political spending called earmarks. Many say it's a sneaky way Democrats and Republicans in Congress spend your tax dollars on projects that benefit them but may not be best for all of us. After much criticism, Republicans led the way to ban earmarks in 2011, but that doesn't mean they were gone forever. Josie Sturman talks with Tom Schatz, the head of Watchdog Citizens Against Government Waste.
What are earmarks?
An earmark is an item added by a member of Congress to an appropriations bill outside of the normal spending process, generally to help their district or state, because members vote for bills that they ordinarily wouldn't vote for, so that they can get a small earmark of a few $1 million.
What do you see as other egregious earmarks? Are there any off the top of your head that really stick out?
There's $836,000 to eliminate the brown tree snakes in Guam, which, yes, is a U.S. territory, but it is really not a problem that affects the entire United States. There's $9 million to eradicate and quarantine fruit flies. $13 million for Save America's Treasures, which is used for local museums and theaters and opera houses. In the past, some of that money hasn't even been used for its intended purpose and returned to the Treasury.
What do you see as the real harm, though, of earmarks?
Earmarks corrupt the entire budget process. In the early 2000s, members of Congress and lobbyists went to jail over earmarks. That is what eventually led to the moratorium that was adopted in 2010. $15.3 billion in earmarks in fiscal year 2019 is more than it has ever been under the moratorium, so it's moving in the wrong direction.
So you talk about this moratorium, and obviously there was an effort to eliminate these or at least limit the number of them. Why does it seem like they're growing?
Congress always finds ways to get around its own rules. Members of Congress are very creative in how they spend the taxpayers' money.
Some people would argue that this is what helps get legislation passed, but do you see it just as greasing hands between powerful people?
The members of Congress who get the earmarks are disproportionately on the Appropriations Committee. The members of the Appropriations Committees in the House and Senate, which comprise about 15% of the entire Congress, they got 51% of the earmarks and 61% of the money. It's disproportionate, it is unfair, and it's corrupting. That's what's wrong with earmarks.
This year, Republicans in the Senate made their self-imposed ban on earmarks permanent. Over in the House, some Democrats have pushed to restore them. But at last word, there wasn't enough support to allow them again in 2020. Next week on Full Measure, we head to our southern border. No, not that one, but way south in Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory in the Caribbean where Border Patrol battles major human trafficking and drug smuggling. I don't think most Americans think of Puerto Rico as a place that is sort of on the front lines of the war on drugs.
It is, and it's very unique. We're in a unique strategic location. It's an easy route for smugglers to actually move their narcotics or any other type of contraband to any secluded beach, maybe to some of the mangroves, maybe to other outer sister islands that we have here in Puerto Rico.
We'll go on patrol with federal agents to see the challenges that come with patrolling a border that's nothing more than an invisible line in the ocean, 12 nautical miles out to sea. There's a new way you can get more of Full Measure. We've started a podcast offering a little inside information about how we go about our reporting. You can find Full Measure After Hours on iTunes and Spotify, among others. Just search and enjoy. Until then, thanks for watching. We'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable.